49 years ago this month, thousands of South Vietnamese children were airlifted to the United States and other Western countries in a mass evacuation known as Operation Babylift. Many were orphans, but some were reluctantly handed over by parents, desperate to protect their children from communist retribution as Saigon fell around them. We talked about Operation Babylift in some depth last year in episode 49. As I was researching the subject in preparation for that episode, I came across the amazing story of Lee Small. Lee was a 3.5-year-old passenger on an Operation Babylift flight, adopted and raised by an American family, and she was reunited with her birth mother 44 years later in Vietnam. It's an incredible story, and I had wanted to include it in episode 49, but I wasn't able to make the interview happen in time. Cut to September of last year. I was traveling through Maine, where Lee lives with her husband and children, and I reached out to let her know that I was in her neck of the woods. She very graciously invited me into her home, where we sat in her dining room and had what I think is one hell of a conversation. In this episode, on the 49th anniversary of Operation Babylift, you'll hear that conversation. Stick around. From the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, founders of The Wall, this is Echoes of the Vietnam War. I'm your host, Michael Crone, bringing you stories of service, sacrifice, and healing from people who still feel the impact of that conflict more than 50 years later. Episode 72, Fortunes, right after this.
Hi, I'm Anne Margaret. I went to Vietnam to entertain the troops in 1966 and 1968. My guys, my gentlemen, if you lived through the Vietnam War era, you know the impact that the war had. But today, we are in danger of history being lost. Current generations know very little about the war or the people who served. As more of our Vietnam vets pass away each day, their stories are being lost to history. Together, we can change that. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund is the organization that built the wall. It works to ensure that future generations will understand the war's impact. Let's help keep the promise that the wall was built on. Never forget. Visit vvmf.org to find out how you can get involved.
The Registry is an online community created by VVMF that connects veterans of the Vietnam War era with each other. By signing up for the Registry, you can upload and share stories and images, connect with others who served during the Vietnam era, and connect your service with people you knew whose names are now on the wall. Join the community and preserve your legacy or a family member's by signing up today at vvmf.org/registry. Here's my conversation with Lee Small, recorded in her home in Scarborough, Maine. Much of the conversation focuses on her parents, which can be confusing since she technically has two sets. When Lee says, "my parents," she means the ones who raised her, Mary Beth and Roland Boughton. Her birth father was an American soldier named Joe O'Neill, and her birth mother is a South Vietnamese woman named Depp. One other note, we were joined in Lee's dining room by her dog Finley. Every now and then, you'll hear her padding around on the hardwood floors. Okay, enough preamble. Strap yourselves in.
I grew up in essentially New York City and then moved to New Jersey with my family. Okay. And then as college came, I moved to Maine and stayed here.
How about that? Mm-hmm. You came to Maine for school and stayed?
And stayed, yeah.
Well, that's exactly what the Maine higher education institutions are hoping for.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. What'd you study?
I studied sociology.
Mm-hmm. And you said 20 years you've been here, roughly?
I'd say probably about 25 years. So I graduated high school in 1990, took a couple years locally to kind of find myself, and then moved up here, went to University of Southern Maine, which is about 15 minutes from here in the greater Portland area, and met my husband who grew up in Maine, so we stayed here, raising our family. You
said that you grew up for the most part in New York, and did you grow up with siblings?
I did. I have 3 siblings, 2 brothers and sisters, and a younger brother. Or an older brother and sister and a younger brother.
You have an older brother and sister and a younger brother.
Yeah.
Okay. And you obviously were adopted. I
was adopted, yes. So my older brother and sister are the biological children of my parents, and I have a younger brother who was adopted from the Philippines.
Okay. Okay. What do you have any idea what motivated your parents to adopt 2 children from another part of the world?
My parents are very Catholic, and they were very involved in the church. And during the early 70s, they the Catholic Charities was just kind of dealing with a lot of stuff going on over in Asia, and knew that there were a lot of children available who needed homes. So they initially initiated a adoption through the Philippines, and that was going to take a little longer. And then Catholic Charities was very involved with Operation Babylift. And when my parents heard a baby was immediately needed for a home, they volunteered for that while they were waiting for my younger brother to arrive.
And how did they hear about it?
Through church.
Through the church?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to share your parents' names?
Yeah, Mary Beth and Roland Boughton. My dad was stationed in Boston, and I know from experience being raised on a military base in New York City that there was a lot of Asian communities there, Filipinos. So I think it was just a similar or familiar environment to be in.
Sure.
So I would assume that had something to do with it, beyond the fact that they were very religious and very involved with the church organizations.
Yeah. They had 2 children on their own, but they were like, we got more room at the table. Let's pull up a couple more chairs.
Yep. Yes.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. My parents had a very big community around them, especially through the church. And I was always kind of the young, cute girl that was adopted. So I got a lot of positive attention. And then when we moved to Governor's Island, I've had this question asked a lot in terms of feeling like I was different from being Vietnamese. But when we moved to Governor's Island, again, there was a huge Filipino American society there, and we had a lot of friends who adopted babies also from China through a different organization. So I never felt out of sorts. And then, of course, being in New York City, there's just the melting pot. So it wasn't, I think it'd be very different had I been born in Maine, or not born, but adopted into Maine. I think that would be much more kind of in your face, how different I was, or any types of tension. But I really never felt any of that. I just think because it was a natural environment for me to be in with different cultures around.
Sure. How old were you when you learned about Operation Babylift?
I think when I was in a school environment in high school, there was a story done about it, and I was like, oh, I think that sounds familiar. And then really, there was a news article that came out. I followed this page on Instagram, so this was probably in the last 5 years, that did a lot of storylines of history of the wars, and there was a huge baby Operation Storylift one, and it kind of made me look into it more. And I think that maybe that pushed a little bit more to me, for me to get my DNA tested and look into it a little better.
And how old were you at the time?
Probably, I don't know.
Roughly?
5 years ago. So 45, 46.
Okay.
So, but I mean, I was aware of it too, because I did go visit Vietnam when I was just getting married. So I was 30, looking for information. So clearly Operation Babylift was part of what we were looking for paperwork and investigating. So that, but it wasn't something big in my life. It was just at that moment when we went to Vietnam to look, that had to be mentioned when we looked for things and went to, orphanages and stuff.
Did you go to Vietnam for the purposes of doing this research?
Yes.
And your husband went with you?
No, my mother was going on business, and she said, hey, you want to go to Vietnam? And I tagged along, and we were about to we knew we were going to start having kids, and I said, this is the time to do it before I get logged down with life. And we went specifically with the paperwork that said the town I was adopted in, what year, and Catholic charity paperwork. And we went there thinking that I was dropped off at an orphanage. There was an orphanage in the town. So we went through books there, looked for stuff, but didn't find anything.
Didn't find anything?
Nothing. But we were looking in the wrong place. I wasn't dropped off at an orphanage. I was dropped off at a specific Operation Babylift location. So that's why.
No kidding.
And any paperwork in this orphanage prior to 76 was burned. So nothing was there prior to the communists coming in.
Wow. So this is, I mean, to me, this is a fascinating aspect of your story, is that you weren't an orphan until Operation Babylift started.
I was not. I was adopted when I was 3.5, maybe, not quite 3.5. My mother kept me for 3 years. Yeah. Which makes it kind of more agonizing, especially now that I'm a mother.
For her.
Understanding that pain of how do you get, maybe understanding you can give up a baby at, out of the hospital and it's still painful, but you haven't bonded that connection. So when she does it when I'm 3.5, it's just seems so much deeper.
Well, imagine how afraid she must have been.
Yes, exactly. How all the families felt afraid there. That was their best way to keep their baby safe, they thought.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. My goodness. So you said you were around 30, went over to Vietnam.
Yep.
Did some research, found nothing because you were looking in the wrong place.
Yep.
So when is the next time in your life that this comes up for you? I mean, in the meantime, you get married, you have children, right? You have a career.
And I think when you start having kids, the questions every time you go in a doctor's office is, what's your history? What's your medical history? And I think that really stemmed a lot of curiosity for me. I don't know my history. I don't know if I had breast cancer. I don't know if we have, diabetes. I had no answers. So every time we went to the doctor's office for the kids or for paperwork, I had nothing. And I think that really stemmed me like, maybe I should find that stuff out. And it was a little curiosity, maybe personally, but also it was medical for a while. And that kind of got the ball rolling with saying, I'm going to put my DNA test in and see what we find.
Okay, so what changed from 30 until whenever that was the availability of DNA tests.
Absolutely.
Right? Because, I would assume that having gone to Vietnam, if you can't find the answers in Vietnam, in the village where you were adopted, the answers just don't exist. But then came the DNA test.
Then came the DNA. I mean, I have my full name, but my last name, Wen, is essentially Smith in America. So it wasn't something that was going to stand out. But that's all I had. So DNA was the kind of the logical best way to figure it out. I mean, you see the shows on TV. I think probably shows on TV kind of triggered, oh, okay, that's how it's supposed to go. Maybe I can do it. So you sign up.
When you did that, did you have any idea that it would lead to your birth mother? I mean, to meeting her?
No, I don't. I think probably more in America. I thought that I'd find more of my father than my mother.
Your father was a GI?
He was.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I did know that. That was something that was told to us.
Okay. Yeah, well, now I need to ask that whole side of it. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, okay,
Did you find him as well?
He had passed away, but they found me because my half-sister, who was a year when he was in Vietnam, years old, he was married and had a family. So when he was in Vietnam having a relationship with my mother, she was born, and there's other siblings as well that came later through other marriages. But they found her. Somebody who was helping my mother find information, knew my father's name, Joe O'Neill, found his obituary, found my half-sister, and called her and tried to convince her for months to do the DNA. They didn't think it was true. They didn't think there was any connection. They were trying to line up. He had been gone over there 3 times. So they were trying to line up the dates of how could that be possible? How could he have a child at this date? Finally convinced her because she just wanted to be left alone. And sure enough, it matched.
So forgive me, which mother is doing all this?
My biological mother in Vietnam.
She is.
Was like all the meanwhile, I'm in America living my life. She is regretting the decision she made. She is calling the U.S. government as much as she can, trying to find paperwork, trying to find my father to get in touch with him. Sent my dad a letter also saying, you're not coming back. You told me you would. Or I'm putting our daughter up for adoption because I'm worried through Operation Babylift.
Yeah.
So
because they're being overrun.
Yeah.
Wow. So she's looking for you.
She's looking for me. No idea she was looking for me.
And she encounters your half-siblings along the way.
She finds with help my half-sibling. Yeah. And so my first acknowledgement that there was any connection was a ding on Ancestry saying, I believe I'm your half-sister. Your mom's looking for you. Like, that's the message. That was crazy. It was about 4 years ago in September, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm just setting up dinner, and I get this ding on my emails, and that's the message that comes up, and I just start shaking. And I call my husband immediately, and we both agreed. We're like, okay, let's just back up a little bit, and because you don't know if people are pulling your leg, you don't know if they're trying to get something from you. So she tries to say, I'd love to talk to you, and I'm like, okay, just give me a minute. I don't know.
She being the half sibling.
Yeah, Bonnie, my half sister. And she immediately sends me, she goes, this is your birthday, this is your name. I have a picture of your mother because your mother sent it to me. And she sent me pictures that my mom had sent to Bonnie of my face that I can remember pictures when I was moved to America. And I'm like, that's my face. Like, undeniably, that is my face. So, and within 5 hours of that ding, I was on the phone call with my biological mother in Vietnam, Deb.
Within 5 hours.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Bonnie had that phone number.
Bonnie had that phone number. They had given her all the information and said, can you contact Lee and help us out?
Wow. 5 hours is a remarkably quick turnaround. How did you process it so quickly?
It was crazy. I mean, I was shaking. And then I eventually did call Bonnie, like right after. I told my husband, I'm like, I'm just going to call her. We're going to see what happens.
And she did sleep on it?
No, I don't know. It was just this rush of emotions, and it was crazy. And I probably could have slept on it. I didn't even wait to tell my adoptive parents. I just was in this, just energized. And, I waited till my husband was home, my kids were home, because they all wanted to hear it. It was probably 9:30, 10 here, so it was 9 in the morning there. And she's on the streets walking to work, and, you can hear all the buses and the mopeds in the background and the chaos, and she just had some questions. She's like, I don't know if you're it, and she kind of went over some things, and she's like, okay, yeah, you're my daughter. So, because they hadn't done DNA with her yet. Couldn't afford it, was too poor, didn't have the connections with some of the bigger organizations in America that will help. But once those organizations saw my story, they sent her a DNA kit, and then it was confirmed within, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks from there.
Did she speak English to you?
Very broken.
In that first conversation?
Yeah, very broken. But understandable. I mean,
Did you speak any Vietnamese? No. Okay. So the broken English was all you had?
It was enough.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how did she determine in that conversation? I mean, first of all, I can't even imagine when she answered the phone. What did you say?
I called. Yeah, I said hi, Deb, and she's like, hello, and I'm like, my name's Lee. I know that you've been in contact with Bonnie. I think I'm your daughter, and I don't know if somebody gave her a heads up that I was going to call. Maybe the guy who helped initially get Bonnie to do the DNA. He's Vietnamese, but he's been living in America, so he was a good kind of conduit to helping us. Okay. So she just was like, I don't know if this is real, because she had a disappointment 5 years ago with a girl who lived in Canada, same name. I read my whole name to her. I told her my birth date and what town I had recorded that I was from, and it all lined up. So, and we talked not long that night. It was very quick because she was on the way to work. But
I don't even know how she could go to work.
Because she had, after we met, I learned a lot that she just kind of lived for finding me. It was everything she could do. And she never got married again. She never had another child. She wrote, the United States all the time trying to find information. There was news organizations over there working with her that were trying to help her. Little did I know, all I had to do was plug in my real name into the computer, and stories would have come up of me in Vietnam. So I just had no clue that she was looking for me. So had the DNA not taken then, I don't know if I would have had the whereabouts to be like, well, let me just plug my name in and see what happens. Yeah. But there she was. You said
that your name was as common as
my
Smith.
Last name, yeah, but my full name kind of connected. to kind of bring it back to Kath Turner, who helped us, the next day, one of my dear friends was like, oh, we were watching, I had sent an email out to my dearest friends and just said, listen, this is what's going on. And she and her husband saw a documentary randomly on the internet, started watching it. It's Kath Turner in Vietnam doing stories on children or parents who are looking for their parents, because she had just
parents who were looking for their children.
She was just connected with her mother, who had done the same thing essentially, but she was adopted into Australia. At the end of this documentary that my friends randomly pull up, she's like, the picture you sent me is on this woman's wall. So that was my mother. It's really freaky how that kind of lined up. And she goes, this is the name of documentary. So within 24 hours, I'm seeing a video of my mother talking about her search for me with Kath
your
Turner,
photo
with my
her
photos
soldier.
of what I had gotten from Bonnie in the last 24 hours. So it was just really weird. And I'm like, oh my God, and she's like, she literally has an altar of you in the background, like of all your baby pictures there, worshiping you, trying to find you, telling Kath she's been looking for years.
She's so heartbroken.
So heartbroken. And it's all over her face. And I think I was fine until then. And then like from then on, it was just kind of an emotional roller coaster of what this woman went through and the guilt that I was having over kind of not being aware of what she went through.
So you went from figuring out that she was your mother to talking to her on the phone within 5 hours.
Yeah.
How long from that phone call until you were booking a flight?
2 months.
2 months. So at the same time you discovered your mother, you must have also discovered the identity of your father?
Yes.
Okay. But he had passed away already?
He had passed away already about 9 years before, I think. Okay. Bonnie and I connected.
Were you interested in learning anything about him? And
yeah,
if so,
I
think... Did Bonnie help you out on that?
She did, yes. And he has... 3 weeks ago, I had met Bonnie a year after the story came out. She flew here. 3 weeks ago, she came back here with another half-sister of mine, just 3 weeks ago. So that was kind of a really nice full circle moment, because then not only did I get Bonnie's side, who has a different story of who he was than this other half-sister. So it was nice to kind of have both those, stories to kind of live with.
Do Bonnie and the other half-sister share the same mother?
They don't. He was married 7 times.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Wow. So, well, it's good to have a hobby.
Yeah.
I guess.
I think, yeah, he was just kind of a wanderer and loved excitement. And, and I do think from what I've heard.
Irish charm.
I guess so. That's what they say. He was quite the charmer. So, and yeah, it's very funny, humorous to a point. But I do think the war affected him a lot. I think he just was a rolling stone after that and couldn't, regroup maybe some of the stuff that he experienced and saw. And, I read a kind of a diary of one of his wives that my other half sister shared. And she writes about how she just couldn't, he just in like 76 or 77, he just became sad and she couldn't figure out she couldn't get through to it. And I think maybe that's why he had a lot of divorces, because he wasn't sharing any of that story. And I think that is true with a lot of Vietnam vets. My husband's father was in Vietnam, never talked about it with anybody. And my husband said to me after all this came out, he said, my dad's never spoken to me about this. He's spoken to you more than he has anybody about it. So, and I think that it's just, I don't know what they, experienced over there. So I don't think it's something that they come over here and tell stories of a lot, unless maybe they're constantly hanging out with other vets.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think not much of what they experienced was good, but I think the bigger issue for them was they came home and nobody wanted to hear it. I think they bottled it up because
they weren't welcomed home.
They weren't welcomed home. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the reaction of your family to all of this? Were they excited? Were they nervous?
Very excited. Oh, your family. Very excited. I mean, my mom had always instigated kind of the interest of it and me going over there and wanting to, find that out. So they were very excited. I think I'm not a very open person with my emotions, and I don't talk a lot about kind of certain things until this all happened. So I think there was a reserved amount of talk about it or energy around it based on what I was trying to kind of deal with and hold on to and hold tight. So, because I was kind of a basket case. One of the reasons why it was so quick from the time the phone call happened and the trip was my husband was like, I was crying every day. He's like, this needs to be resolved. You need to meet your mom. This needs to happen because, it was just really, really hard. And thank God he did, because we would have waited till after Christmas and then it would have been COVID and it would have been a delay on that. So
you got in there right under the wire.
Right under the wire. And he goes, it's, taking a toll on you. And I think you just need to resolve it and you need to meet her and get it not over with in terms of let's get it done with, but just, this is a huge part of your life that I don't think I realized affected me so much until it really was torn open.
Yeah.
And there was, I always described it immediately as survivor's guilt, though. So that was some of the sadness that she sacrificed me. And she was the oldest of 8 children. After the war was done, her family was in rebels. She had a great job with the United States. That's how she met my father. She was flying in helicopters. She spoke really good English. People thought she was beautiful. They were benefiting off it. And then when it crashed for them. And she never recovered from it. So here I am in America living the dream, which is what she probably wanted. And that's why she made that sacrifice. But I just thought, why me? Like, why did I get this? And here she is, 40 years later, stuck in the same place and didn't move on from it at all. So, and I think just my kind of ignorance to it all just made me feel really bad. And it wasn't like guilt because I didn't have anything to do with it, but I felt so ignorant to everything of what a lot of people in Vietnam dealt with when it left, when America, left.
So as you're discovering all this and making plans to fly to Vietnam, and I'm sure she's very excited that you're coming, and I'm assuming your kids are totally on board, right?
We were going to leave them at home and they were not having it.
Are you also at this time discovering anything about the operation? Are you curious about that at all?
Not really. I mean, I've learned more about it for sure, but I think
it's just sort of incidental to you?
I mean, I do get it. I do get what happened, and I do understand the significance of it. I think maybe because so many stories came to me that were not good, that people were adopted into families that were not healthy and in a happy environment. I don't know if it soured me on it, and that could be with any adoption. It doesn't necessarily have to be that one. And then the fact that I learned that a lot of the babies, they were supposed to have their story like stapled to them, who they were, what their names were. That hurt me that some of these babies showed up without that information, who to call, who to get back in touch with. And then heard stories that maybe some of the families were misled, that's, they thought this was a loan, or they thought they were keeping them safe and then they'd all come back. So there was different stories that did come to light after that kind of, I don't know, made me sad to kind of look back into.
Yeah.
I have been more interested in the Vietnam vet side of it. I volunteer at breakfasts. I just learn more about that, and I'm more empathetic to that side of it, I think, from that.
Sure.
After a short break, Lee travels to Saigon, where she meets her birth mother, Depp, for the first time in 44 years. Stick around. Let's talk about the wall for a minute. It is widely considered to be the memorial that changed memorials forever. Its design invites a level of engagement, of introspection, of reverence that no fountain, no statue of a cannon or a man on a horse could ever match. The volunteers who work there often talk about wall magic, that unexpected, often spiritual connection or discovery that happens when you visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's one of the reasons why the wall's design has inspired so many other memorials around the world. Of course, there is one little problem with the wall's design. 140 panels of polished black granite aren't exactly portable. So, unless you can get yourself to Washington, D.C., how are you supposed to experience wall magic for yourself? Well, guess what? We already thought of that. In 1996, VVMF unveiled an exact replica of the wall that could be packed into an 18-wheeler and hauled to cities and towns all across America. Since then, the Wall That Heals has been displayed in nearly 700 communities throughout the nation, spreading the healing legacy of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial to millions of visitors. Sure, there are other versions of the wall that travel around the country, but the Wall That Heals is the only one that is an exact replica of the one in Washington, created and maintained by the same organization that built the wall in the first place. And not only that, the Wall That Heals is accompanied and curated by VVMF employees who work with host communities to ensure that the experience is as close as possible to the real thing. And that includes wall magic. But you don't have to take my word for it. You can check out episode 15 of this podcast to learn what happens to people's hearts when this traveling exhibit rolls into a real-life American community. The Wall That Heals and the Mobile Education Center that travels with it will be in Peoria, Arizona, April 11 through 14, and Frisco, Texas, May 2 through 5. To see the rest of this year's tour schedule and to learn how you can bring the Wall That Heals to your town, visit vvmf.org. And now, back to my conversation with Lee Small.
So now you're on the flight.
Mm-hmm.
Who's with you?
My husband and my 3 children.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All 5 of you?
All 5 of us.
This would have been December or November-ish, fall-ish?
Yeah, right the week before Thanksgiving.
Of
So November,
2019.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because wasn't it?
Yep, it was 2019 because 2020
was COVID,
was
yeah.
nightmare.
So you're on the plane. What plans have you made for when you land? Is this going to be a big thing, or are you just going to show up at her door and keep it small?
No,
like what?
It's quite organized so my cousin who runs a couple tourist agencies speaks very good English. So he was kind of heading up all communication on that side. We had done a couple...
She enlisted him.
Okay. He was very involved. We had a couple Zoom calls. We wanted to know where we were going to stay. They wanted me to stay in this small little town that I grew up in. The house, they're still in the house in the neighborhood that I grew up in. So I just knew I have got 2 sons who have some learning disabilities and developmental disabilities. I just knew that they would need a zone down time at the end of the day. Mm. So we stayed more in Ho Chi Minh City in a more modern hotel. Okay. But my cousin was useful with getting us a car and transportation over there. But they were coming to the hotel. It was kind of a big ordeal because when the story broke, it did get some news over here, but over there it got a lot of news. And they were harassing my mother for the story. They wanted it because she was the woman who was in the news looking for her daughter. She was the emblem over there of that story, the poster child of that storyline.
Wow.
She was writing to newspapers
just because
every
of her
day.
intensity?
Just because of her intensity with it. She was looking in the newspaper every day for storylines of me looking for her, because a lot of the adoptees will write in the newspaper over there, say, this is my name, looking for my parents, I was born this day. That's how a lot of connections happened before the internet, obviously. So she would sit every day and look through the newspaper, look for my name, look for any sign that I was looking for her. So, and that was her life.
40-some years.
This was her life. She did nothing else but work, minimal jobs just to keep rent up and take care of her siblings. She was so focused and exhausted from it. This was her life. So it was very intense for her. It was more intense for her. Like, I wanted it because obviously curiosity, and it's an amazing story, and it's a feel-good story. And of course I want to meet my mom and find their story out. She almost needed it. Like, it was, I think she felt her age was coming close, like it was getting desperate. Was this going to happen or not? Mm-hmm. So it was very kind of crazy for her over there. So they kind of secretly brought her to the hotel, and we were to meet in the hotel on camera, and have kind of the interview and stuff. So, but it was it's kind of built up to this huge thing, but it's a very, very odd feeling. You're supposed to have this intense connection with somebody, but yet technically you've never met them your whole life. And you haven't been thinking of them every day as intensely as that other person has been thinking of you. So it was a really weird mix of feelings, that initial meet and greet. it was, you know.
Well, plus it must have felt a little bit contrived if the cameras were
It was. And she was very contrived with everything because she had seen documentaries before about children coming over, them feeling overwhelmed, and them just kind of not ever communicating with their parents again. And she was frightened of that feeling. Mm-hmm. There had been a story, same exact story as mine. And then they, you know, the girl just got scared off. She was from the Midwest, very small town. She goes to Vietnam, finds her family, and it's like 50 cousins and hot. And she just left and never communicated. So my mom was very contrived with everything that she said, everything she did. She told people what they could ask me. She told people if they could talk to me. She wanted to make sure it was perfect, which unfortunately I think made it, for me, because we're American, we just kind of sit and have a beer and everything's casual, made it very hard for me to feel natural and comfortable in it. But I didn't know all that until after the fact. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
at the time, you're just too busy going through it.
And I'm like, what? This is such a weird feeling. Like, why isn't she crying and hovering over me? Like, it was very kind of cold. And that's a little of the Asian, I guess, the elder Asian side of it too. But she was very kind of not what I expected when we met. But
so how long were you there?
There for 5 quick days. We had already booked a trip prior to this, and we had Thanksgiving at the end of it, so we squeezed it in. We get there on a Sunday morning, and we leave on a Friday morning. So
wow! And so, did you go to the house?
We went to the house. Yeah. All the family was there.
I mean, you said she was one of 8, so you must have had. I mean, the place must have been crawling with cousins.
It was crazy. There was a couple big meals that were very overwhelming, but they put on the spread. It was amazing. Like, it was, you know, my uncles were there, and I was in the house. Like, they were pointing at me. The way they looked at me was just. It was the kind of the way I wanted my mom to look at me. But they were looking at me like, I remember that little face. Like, I remember you running. And they said, I remember you running, Hall, down there, you know, and falling on your knee over in that corner. And so that was really sweet and endearing. And, you know, she showed me the house where she had this temple of me. And we went to the temple where my grandparents were, who my grandfather took care of me. So she wanted to bring me to his place. Like, it's just, it was lovely. That day was lovely. Just really everything that I could imagine that day to be. So
I'm so focused on her for some reason. I mean, what she must have been going through, because it was easy for them to be at ease with you.
Yeah.
They didn't have at stake what she had.
I didn't realize that.
Like, the stakes for her were monumental.
That's what it was.
40 years, and what if I get rejected? What if this doesn't go well?
Yeah. So I wish we had kind of communicated that before. Like, I wish maybe had I waited a little longer, some of those things would have come out. Because I was seeing it from a different way, and she was portraying it in a certain way that she didn't want to scare me off. But by doing that, I felt scared off because it wasn't this kind of warm, homey, you know, result from her. Everyone else, it was incredible. And you're right, I didn't look at it that way. They didn't have anything to lose from it. So, because they were just in awe of the whole storyline like everybody else was. So, and she was more like, no, this is the moment. This is my life.
She could be crushed by this.
She could be. And she was very nervous that that's what would happen, that I would leave that Friday and never have a communication with her again. And that was a big fear of hers, and much controlling of everything that she did that week.
What was the biggest surprise for you? Not in terms of your visit to Vietnam, but as you looked at your mother for the first time, as you got to know her a little bit, what was the biggest, good or bad?
How sad she was. I guess I didn't expect her to be so sad. Not sad at me, but sad in life. It was, you could tell I was almost an obsession for her, and I didn't realize that. So that was the biggest surprise. When of course, I thought she was looking like I was looking. Oh, curiosity. Oh,
isn't this neat?
Let's put my name and let's see what happens. Yeah.
Right.
And it wasn't. It was so serious for her. And, I guess, again, looking at it now, opposed to right when it was happening, maybe it would be the same story with my 3 kids if I had given them up, or, if I felt forced to give them up, that would strangle me for the rest of my life. I'm sure of it. Yeah. Or have a chokehold on every decision I made, or how would you not go to bed every night with that on your mind?
How would you not go to the grocery store
Yeah.
with that on your mind?
Yes.
I mean, the post office.
Yeah. So
everywhere you go, you're
was,
missing children, or their absence is the greatest
and you
presence
don't know.
in your life.
You know nothing. Like she didn't, and she did not know, getting back to the Operation Babylift, whether I was on that plane that crashed the first time. She didn't know. So she didn't know whether her efforts were, even worth it. None of the people knew whether their babies were on that flight.
So for 40 years, she's looking at the paper every day, and half of her brain is thinking, this kid might have died on day one.
Yeah, but you're holding on
But
to
just
that.
in case, I better check these obituaries.
Yeah. And I think that was just such a big surprise for me. And again, I was so ignorant to it that I had no understanding of why, that was happening. And I feel so bad about that.
She talked to you about your father?
Very little.
Yeah. Did you get the sense that she was in love?
Very much. I think actually that's also a very much surprise. I grew up, actually I should have mentioned this. Miss Saigon was probably the first time, the play Miss Saigon. It's probably the first time that I ever got emotional over it. And I probably saw that, actually I saw it when I was 18. And that, I'd never cried about it before like that. And because I looked at that as my story. My mother fell in love with a soldier, but then sometimes I would take a dark twist on it because you heard of stories happening over there.
You bet.
So I didn't know if it was what happened in the corner of a dark room. I didn't know whether it was love. I didn't know how I was conceived. So, and I think that probably blocked me off of also not kind of getting into it when I was younger. So it really shocked me pleasantly. That is one wonderful thing about this is they were in love. He went back there 3 times, and every time he went back there, he was with her. They went on dates. She told that he would make her laugh, and
Before you were born?
Before I was born, yes. So he left in 70. He left right when he'd never even met me. So he left in 71, probably, because I was born January 72.
But he'd done 3 tours?
Yeah, 3 tours. Kept coming back. Even though he had Bonnie and my sister Chris at home, he went back 3 times, and they were dating. She was desperately in love with him. And I think that was probably another part of why she just didn't move on. And I don't think it was her sorrow that he made promises that she didn't come back. She never talked badly about him. Not one inkling of a sentence. It was all good.
Was he an officer?
No.
What branch was he in?
Army.
So I was just wondering, how could he know that he would, every time he went back, he'd be near her? Because he could have been anywhere.
Yeah. I don't know how they figured that out. Well, he was
Unless
in
he
the
had
band.
a very specific job that required him to be at, in Saigon.
He was in the band. He was part of the entertainment crew as well.
What did he play?
So, drums.
Okay. All right.
Yep. So apparently the ladies love the drums. So, but he continued to play that in America.
As a trumpet player, I can vouch for that.
Yeah.
Chicks always go for the drummer.
Yep.
So let's talk about since then. So that was, obviously COVID probably got in the way of any further reunions.
Yeah.
But what has the level of contact been between you and Deb?
It's very difficult. We did resolve with some interpretation, and I think we're taking age, culture, and language barriers that are really hard to get through. So it took a while for me to kind of express how I was feeling about things and for me to learn why she was acting a certain way. So through some help, we've kind of gotten to an understanding of why that week was so difficult and what her expectations were of that visit opposed to my expectations of it. And we left it with good feelings, but since then, unfortunately, because of COVID, she lost her job, which she was 72 and she was still working as a custodian in a grammar school, riding her bike 5 miles each way, trying to still save some money because she never got married. She still lives with my aunt, one of her sisters, and their husband. So I think she feels very much a burden on that. So between COVID, not having a job, getting older, she had a stroke. She's just very tired. And
she had a stroke after you met?
And I very much think that trying to find me was her passion and what happens when you lose that. So I think that she's just aged so much from that. that she's no longer that woman who's looking for her child, you know, getting interviewed in the newspaper. She's, you know, no longer has a drive every day, and she doesn't have a job. So I think she's lost just a tremendous amount of who she is in the last 4 years.
Well, see, that never would have occurred to me.
Oh,
once that purpose has been fulfilled.
Because it was when it's that intense.
What keeps you going?
Yeah.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
Well, when you don't have, she didn't have a husband to sit there and talk about how wonderful it was. She didn't have a child to kind of embrace after that. So it's just her. You know, and I don't.
True, but I mean, we do live in the age of, you know, FaceTime. And,
yes, yeah,
you know.
and I was FaceTiming her quite a lot when we came home. You know, it was difficult. It's right up to her face, and I'm kind of looking at her nose and her eye, and I'm like, Deb, move it back, you know. And she always wants to see the kids in the background.
Sure.
And you know, it was nice, but between the stroke and I think her just getting older, the conversations are very. You know, I just miss you. I can't take it anymore. When are you coming back? And that's kind of it. There's not a lot of substance on it because she doesn't go out of the house. She doesn't do any, we try to, you know, we send her money, try to get her to buy books and watch films and sing because she loves to sing or go out to karaoke, and she doesn't do anything. So all she's doing now is holding on to the hope of when I'm coming back. So that's a lot of pressure for me every time I call her because I don't have an answer to that. And I might go back next year because that is the anniversary, 50th anniversary. Mm-hmm. So, but I can't, you know, promise her those things. I might go back.
For the 50th anniversary of the operation, mm-hmm. or the 50th anniversary?
Fall of Saigon too.
Yeah.
So
right.
They coincide.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wasn't sure which way you were looking at it.
Yeah.
I mean, your kids look like they're getting ready for maybe to finish up high school here pretty shortly.
No, those are old. So I have a daughter who's a junior at Syracuse University. Okay. And my two sons are 21, so they go to a local community college.
Got it.
And stay here. Yeah. Okay. So, you know, the other, well, I hate to use the word burden, but there's a big conception of when you connect with a parent, if they're in distress, especially in the Asian culture, because they all, you know, live together as they get older, mm-hmm. that I'm now responsible for what's happening with her.
And that
I'm the child. And people have written some not nice things on some of these pages, like about why isn't, you know, they call me Mai. Why isn't Mai taking care of her better? Why isn't Mai bringing her to America? Why, you know, and blaming it all on me. And I'm like, well, she'd be miserable if we had brought her over here. She doesn't know anyone. She doesn't know English that well. I don't know Vietnamese. It's cold, and we have we don't know each other at all, but we do, you know, try to help her out financially. But there's a big kind of like, what now? Like, what is the responsibility of this relationship now, or what, you know, where do we go from here? It would be wonderful if we could get closer, but how do you do that with a language barrier and how many miles away?
So putting, you know, roles and responsibilities and all mm-hmm. of that aside for the moment, you know, if you could just wave your magic wand and have an outcome, what would you like it to be?
Listen, if it was easy, I'd go over there every 6 months for like 5 or 4 days, and that, you know, and just kind of connect with her. But that's just not reality. Right. So I'd love for her to be able to sit and tell me stories. I mean, I'd really love to hear a lot of stories with her and Joe, but part of me feels like it's heartbreak for her to tell me these stories. So I'm hesitant to just sit there for an hour at a time and be like, so tell me about a date. Tell me about, you know, did he cook for you? Where did you guys go? Did you go watch movies? Did you see American movies? You know, but I feel like it's heartbreak for her.
How are you?
I'm good now. I mean, I'm good now, but like I said, it was a lot. For about 6 months. Yeah,
and do you think that it was particular to those 6 months, or do you think it was the 40 years of backup?
I didn't. Right? I had no idea. Like I said, I'm a pretty confident, happy person. Don't get into a lot of deep feelings. I had no idea what I needed out of this, or what you look back and you're like, well, that makes sense now, that why you acted that way, why you don't ask for help. You're very guarded. You kind of am stubborn, and it all kind of makes sense on, you know, I think I was over 3 years old, and I was ripped from everything I knew, loving in a loving house with cousins and uncles and grandfathers who were hugging me and taking care of me. And my mother said that when I was adopted, I knew how to put my shoes in the corner and put my socks in that, and like had these manners, that were very, you would think from a well-to-do family, like just had these, I was loved. And I was torn from that without being told anything, and into America, put on a plane, with strangers, and then put in this home where I didn't know the language. I think back and I'm like, God, that was incredibly traumatizing for a child. And as much as I love Mary Beth and Roland, I don't think they realized, and I didn't ask for it, but realized that maybe there could have been some talk about that or some therapy around that would have looked into, some of my behaviors, not terrible behaviors, but, why it caused that. But you think about that, what that would do to a child. Is
there anything we didn't talk about in terms of this story that you wish I had asked you?
No. I just, I just feel very fortunate, and half of me is extremely happy that this all came around. And the other half did, bring up a lot of things that weigh me down a little bit, not more than before, but a lot of surprises, up and down surprises. And the love story was better than I could imagine, but yet her end result was not. So that was a sad thing for me. But, I wish this type of ending, though, for a lot of those families that are still looking. That's kind of where that's kind of one of the reasons I still share my story, because, it's time's running out for a lot of those parents. So they're all aging out, and it's going to be really difficult. So, but technology is kind of catching up, and maybe that's the thing that will help. But
yeah.
So, but it's wonderful. It's been opening my eyes to, I think, not that I've lived a sheltered life, but I have this very wonderfully protected life that I've been fortunate enough to live. And I think it's opened my eyes very much to so many different circumstances in the world. I think that's probably the best thing I've gotten out of it.
Yeah, because really it makes you more grateful.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I totally appreciate and realize how fortunate I am for not that I haven't worked hard for things, but the opportunities that I've been given, that I've taken advantage of, that other people haven't been even given to work with. So that's the biggest take from all of this, I think.
I'm so grateful to Lee for her hospitality and for such a fine conversation, and to Finley for being such a good girl. I hope we'll stay in touch as Lee's relationship with Depp evolves. In the meantime, remember that VVMF is a non-profit organization with no government funding. Our ability to produce this podcast, not to mention all of our other programs like The Wall That Heals, In Memory, and The Registry, depends entirely on support from people like you. If you'd like to help, visit vvmf.org/echoes, and on the left side of the page, click on Support Echoes. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more stories of service, sacrifice, and healing. See you then.